I've got a note here from somebody at Civic Media who says that they put that clip of you talking about tariffs and trying to get a straight answer. They put it up on the Civic Media Instagram, and that site alone, that video got 300,000 views because people are just they in disbelief that they won't answer a basic question from you.
Well, and I guess it was Jimmy Kimmel last night. Last night I was on Lawrence O'Donnell, and what he said, and it made the most sense, was it's such a simple question. And the fact that they can't answer, usually members of Congress have to bloviate, and I'm as bad at that as probably anyone. But it was a really simple question. It wasn't a gotcha. I was trying to get to talking about businesses in Wisconsin that are being hurt by the tariffs. But when he couldn't even answer the most basic question, it just shows you it doesn't pass the smell test that we live by back home.
And let's turn to again the chaos in DC, where nobody's keeping the plates spinning. I mean, the plates are just falling and crashing everywhere. Congressman Mark Pocan joins us. Congressman, how are you?
I'm good. Sorry I'm a little late.
Oh no, you're fine. We had Dr. Underly available, so we've been able to have a very happy twofer today to get both of you on the show this morning. And so let's just start with that. Let's pick up where we left off with Dr. Underly, just on the education funding, because yes, you've been in Congress for a while, but you were in the legislature for quite a while prior to that. And so you can speak as well as anybody to this notion of what the MAGA folks are saying is, well, cutting the U.S. Department of Education doesn't mean anything. We're just returning education control to the states. It's so much more than that.
That's cow manure, okay? Because I know I'm on the radio. That's how I'm saying it. Here's the bottom line. They're cutting 45% of federal funding. What that means, because they have not identified how they're going to do those cuts yet, could mean cuts to things like Pell Grants, which I received when I went to college. It could be cuts to IDA or Title I funding. These are some of the bigger pools of funding. Title I is for lower income districts, many in rural parts of Wisconsin. IDA is for special ed funding. At the end of the day, if you cut one of those two funds locally, you're likely going to have to raise local taxes to pick up for some of the slack, because you're going to have to fire a lot of teachers and you're going to have really big class sizes. So that means we get to pay even more for reduced services so that Elon Musk and Donald Trump get a giant tax cut, because that's now $5.5 trillion estimated by the Joint Committee on Taxation. So Dr. Underly has got her hands very full with what's going to be coming up in the legislature as well. And unfortunately, I don't have a lot of faith in the Republican majority in Congress to get it right.
Well, and faith in whatever they say, because I'm looking at a USA Today article about how it says the Trump administration has reversed course on a proposal to cut all funding for Head Start, and says that there will not be changes to the Head Start funding. I don't know that I can trust that.
No, this happened a number of years ago when they were going to cut, when Trump won, was going to cut Special Olympics funding. And I and others called out the secretary when they came before my committee, and they backpedaled and they didn't. And the good news is we actually were able to add money at the end for it because of how stupid their moves were. And certainly, Head Start is one of those programs that'd be incredibly dumb to try to cut. But they're going to have these cuts supposedly between now and Memorial Day. I think it's going to stretch into between now and July 4th, because they already had to cancel three markups this week, because even their members are saying, oh, you mean when I said I was going to cut $880 billion, I was going to cut Medicaid? Oops. No, they knew it, but they're getting enough pressure from people back home. Exactly. And that's exactly what we need to do right now.
That's right.
That pressure up.
We'll continue the conversation with Congressman Mark Pocan, but first, from the heart of America's up north, live from Lake Wissota. Thanks for making this the place to spend part of your mornings. Joe Specchi in our next hour. I'm Pat Kreitlow, and this is the Civic Media Radio Network. Let's continue the conversation now with Congressman Mark Pocan, and let's start with Medicaid this time around, and a tale of two of your colleagues. You have, on the one hand, Congressman Derek Van Orden, again, saying all the usual things like he has told his leadership and he has signed a pledge not to make any cuts to Medicaid. And, well, we're going to cut all kinds of waste, fraud, and abuse, but not Medicaid. And then Ron Johnson goes and rips off the Band-Aid and says, I don't know why everybody is so squeamish about this. If we got to get rid of Medicaid, we got to get rid of Medicaid, is what he's saying in so many words. And I'm kind of thinking he did us all a favor by saying the quiet part out loud and making it clear that for every Derek Van Orden out there promising not to cut Medicaid, there's a Ron Johnson kind of giving up the game.
Well, the thing is, when you make a promise, you also have to keep it. And I've heard those promises made by that member on SNAP, and he voted to cut SNAP as well. So, what the Republicans in the House did, and then the Senate concurred in a vote, even though they had 2% of the cuts of what the House had, was an $880 billion cut to the Department of to the Energy and Commerce Committee's jurisdiction. Their jurisdiction is Medicaid, Medicare, and everything else, totaling $581 billion. So even if you cut everything else, which no one has ever said they were going to do, you would still have to cut either Medicaid or Medicare by $299 billion by their own votes. So anyone who says that they're not going to cut it already voted to cut it. That's just not true. And, Ron Johnson, often says things out loud that, most people would not say out loud, but it's true. That's what they want to go after. I think they want to make it so that able-bodied men have to work in order to get Medicaid, which saves so little money. That's nothing close to what they're proposing. They're going to propose maybe a per capita limits on folks and all sorts of things. And luckily, they're having a fight within their caucus right now. But I noticed, Derek did not sign the letter that some members sent publicly saying they wouldn't vote for Medicaid cuts. So I guess we'll see what happens at the end of the day. But Medicaid, for your listeners, is healthcare and long-term care for 1.3 million people in Wisconsin. 1 out of 3 kids gets their health care from Medicaid. 55% of seniors in nursing homes gets their support from Medicaid. 45% of adults living independently with disabilities get support from Medicaid. So it's a big thing, and that's why it's important not to cut.
It's a big thing it's a lifeline for so many families. And Senator Ron Johnson just speaks so cavalierly of just, cutting it. It's got to be cut. And I guess magically the private insurance folks come in and it's all affordable somehow or another. I'm not quite sure. Or they just go without coverage. I don't know what the Ron Johnson alternative is. I'm not asking you to speak for him either.
Ron Johnson could take his private jet to any doctor in the country.
Yeah.
I think that percent of people in Wisconsin is very, very small.
So you did allude to the other thing I wanted to ask about with Congressman Van Orden and others who have said, oh, we're not going to cut SNAP, traditionally known as food stamps, nutrition assistance, and came up with this other scheme where instead of passing like 25% of the cost on to the states, you would only pass on the cost based on the SNAP overpayment rate or the error rate in your state, which makes me wonder, was that the Republican plan all along? But you start with an extreme position and then, Derek Van Orden looks like a hero by saying, no, let's go to this lower number instead. Or do you end up that they actually do try to, push 20% of SNAP costs onto state government, and folks like Derek Van Orden have to say, well, what could I do? I was outvoted.
Yeah, that's a cut. And they vote for the package at the end. They voted for a cut. It's so simple. Yesterday I had a little conversation with the Treasury Secretary in a committee, and I asked a real simple question: who pays for tariffs? And boy, the answer was the most esoteric Zen Buddhist sort of theory of life answer, other than who pays for tariffs. And in this case, if you vote to cut the funding, that's a cut. Vote to cut a program. And we can't let them get away with any kind of, tap dancing about what the words mean. And, we need to hold people accountable. So, this is really why when Republican members of the House or Senate don't have town halls and aren't accountable to being heard by their constituents, that, they'll listen to the DC special interests and their leadership rather than the people back home. And that's why that's such a big problem.
I've got a note here from somebody at Civic Media who says that they put that clip of you talking about tariffs and trying to get a straight answer. They put it up on the Civic Media Instagram, and that site alone, that video got 300,000 views because people are just in disbelief that they won't answer a basic question from you.
Well, and I guess it was Jimmy Kimmel last night. Last night I was on Lawrence O'Donnell, and what he said, and it made the most sense, was it's such a simple question. And the fact that they can't answer, usually members of Congress have to bloviate, and I'm as bad at that as probably anyone. But it was a really simple question. It wasn't a gotcha. I was trying to get to talking about businesses in Wisconsin that are being hurt by the tariffs. But when he couldn't even answer the most basic question, it just shows you it doesn't pass the smell test that we live by back home. And at the end of the day, Trump's tariffs are taxes on all of us. And But man, I lost my 5 minutes just trying to get a simple answer to who pays for tariffs. And, I think at the end, the secretary looked pretty bad for trying to tap dance that desperately.
Yeah, look, if you want to do something, just say you're going to do it. And I mean, give Trump credit. At some point, he finally did say, yes, those Barbie dolls will cost a couple of bucks more.
Yeah.
And just follow along with that if you can. But the tap dancing, I sense, will continue as we move through this process. And we appreciate the update. Congressman Mark Pocan from the 2nd Congressional District, always great to catch up with you. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, same. Thank you, Pat. Take care.
All right. Yep. Take care now.